Hey, Detoxers. Welcome to a special episode of the Disinfo Detox. Today, we have a really unique story. We're going to be talking about rideshare drivers and a controversial piece of legislation here in the state of California that has national implications. To help break all this down, I am joined by Brian Dolber, Associate Professor of Communication and Media Studies at California State University San Marcos. He's also a volunteer organizer for Rideshare Drivers United. And we are also joined by a driver himself, Alvaro Bolainez, who is the Vice President of Rideshare Drivers United. Welcome both to the Disinfo Detox.
Thank you, Nolan.
So,
Thank you.
absolutely, it's great to see you. I think to help folks kind of unpack this, and if we can, in the most objective sense possible, before we get into our views on it, can you guys tell us a little bit about what AB 1340 is and what are the implications of this bill?
Sure. AB 1340 was introduced in the California Assembly back in February, and it has the backing of the Service Employees International Union, California. What the bill does is it creates a pathway towards collective bargaining for app-based drivers, people who drive for Uber and Lyft, despite the fact that they do not have that they don't have employee status. That employee status was taken away back, as some people may know, with the Proposition 22 legislation. It was the most expensive proposition in California history. Over $220 million were spent by Uber and Lyft to take away rights that had been secured through prior legislation, AB 5, that was signed by Governor Gavin Newsom, and that locked drivers into independent contractor status with a bunch of provisions that were really meant to look like they were benefits, but were actually trapping drivers into what we found over the last number of years. Far, substandard wages, below the minimum wage, and denied the right to organize. So this bill has been, really put forward by SEIU, but now has the consent of the companies Uber and Lyft. Back on August 30th, 29th or 30th, the governor, Gavin Newsom, announced that, he had met with kind of both sides, and they had come to a consensus where Uber would support these collective bargaining rights as enshrined in this bill, and SEIU would support a measure that would limit the liability of Uber and Lyft, where they currently pay up to $1 million for insurance claims if somebody's hit by an uninsured driver. That's now going to be $30,000 per individual, or $60,000 per individual, or $300,000 per car. And so they are saving an enormous amount of money if that measure goes through and is ultimately signed by the governor.
And just in either of you can speak to this. Is California unique, or is this the situation that rideshare drivers face across the nation in terms of having no access to collective bargaining?
You want to take that, Alvaro?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not only California; it's pretty much in the entire, I would say, in the country, worldwide. Like any other country, is facing the same problem. That we do not have collective bargaining, and there are other states. For example, we have New York, we have Massachusetts, we have Colorado that they pass similar laws, but it's always Lyft and Uber getting in between, the labor movement and with the governor, and then they negotiate something without the drivers being present. And it happens on every state, that the companies, they're always trying to kind of like be one step ahead of the labor movement, ahead of the unions, and then negotiate. And it's like, okay, this is good for drivers. When I talk to drivers, I always tell drivers that whatever Lyft and Uber agree to is because they know it's not good for us.
um, okay, let's unpack that for a second, because I know whenever there's an attempt by, say, like fast food workers to organize, they ultimately get hit by the trope that, well, isn't that like a high school job? I imagine there's some people listening who say like, well, ride sharing, isn't that a job that people just do on the side? Isn't this side work? Do they need a collective bargaining unit? What do you say to that kind of perception that's out there? And Brian, you can take that first. If you want.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, yeah, that's a very common perception. What's important to realize is that while most Uber and Lyft drivers are part time, most rides are performed by people who do this full time. So the vast majority of the work is being done by people who are working very, very long hours. Some people may see this as something that they do like 10 hours a week, but a lot of people are doing this 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week, 90 hours a week. And the people who are actually doing it the longest amount of time are, you know, back if you know 5 years ago before Prop 22, people would sometimes do this full time. There were full time drivers back then, but they'd say, "Oh, I have some flexibility." That flexibility argument, which was really the crux of what Uber and Lyft argued they wanted to preserve with independent contractor status, that's gone because the wages have gotten so low that people are driving 70 hours a week, 80 hours a week, 90 hours a week just in order to make ends meet. And so the idea that like this is sort of, not, really full-time work, or this is just a side hustle, that's propaganda, I think, that's been, pushed by the companies to deny many drivers who really rely on this as their main source of income their rights.
And Alvaro, can you talk a little bit about, for folks out there who, are not a driver, or maybe their only exposure to drivers is, when they're tanked, they get an Uber or something. Can you take us into what is the life like of folks who do this work full time, who are rideshare drivers?
I mean, it's pretty hard, you know. I mean, I personally do not drive as much as I used to drive because I used to drive, a lot. Now I'm just driving less because I have another job. But I know personally full time driver who are driving 100 hours a week. A lot of times people always says why you don't just go look for another job. But you're talking with people that they bought a car specifically to do rideshare, and they still owe half of the car. They bought a car and they financed the car for 7 years. After 2 years, Lyft cut their rates. We keep making less and less money, so they already have close to $200,000 on a 2-year car. So they still have to 5 years to go, and how are they gonna get out of that? So what they decide to do is, just keep on driving and just trash the car. They just keep on driving, and driving 100 hours a week. Trust me, is really tiring. Like really tiring. You only have time to for a bathroom break, and you don't even eat healthy because you always have to be online trying to make money. So you don't want to miss no rides. So you always online. Some people, they even sleep in their cars. They sleep but like 30 minutes, and then they woke up, and then they keep on driving, and they sleep another 30 minutes. They don't even have an apartment because they cannot afford it. They are sleeping in the car. So pretty much they're homeless, without being real homeless. They're homeless because they live in the car because they don't have an apartment to live.
And maybe you can speak to this too. I jumped into a rideshare car. This was a couple of years ago, and they had a camera pointed at the back seat. And as someone who's really opposed to digital surveillance and likes privacy, I was initially kind of critical. But as I was talking to the driver explained to me that they have to keep the camera there, or they chose to keep the camera there for their personal safety. And they started telling me the different stories about the ways in which their safety has been compromised. And quickly, my complaint about the camera disappeared. Can you talk a little bit about the dangers that the drivers face in this line of work?
Yeah, I mean, I had to kick people out of my car, but like me, I'm a big guy, so people, actually think twice to do something to me. But yeah, they still, argue with me, like scream at me. One time, somebody hit my head, the back of my head. I just opened the door and I kicked them out because I'm big. People think twice. But what about these drivers who are like skinny, little, or women's? Um, Lyft and Uber. I think Uber, they just passed this new feature on the app that we're gonna be able to accept cash from the passenger. To me, that's a no because when you start putting cash to the drivers, that's easy to get robbed, because then passengers are gonna be like, okay, now I know this driver has cash because it happens to me before. Like there was this guy trying to rob me, saying, okay, give me your cash. He had an iPhone on his hand, and I said, look, I'm a driver, I don't have no cash. And it was true, I didn't have no cash, but now Uber is trying to make it like where we're gonna be able to accept cash from the passenger. Think about how dangerous that is, because the passengers are gonna know that we carry cash now, and that puts us on a risk. That they might try to like rob us. But like I say, especially women's always face the problem that the passengers, they're always talking bad to them and telling them stuff, and that's like really common. But like I said, with guys, I seen a lot of guys that they get like in trouble with passengers, and they say, I was so afraid to say no, because sometimes we get these people that wants to, for example, my car fit, let's say that if it's 4 people, sometimes you have 6 people, and they all want you to take all 6 in the little sedan, and you're afraid to say no because sometimes you're in the middle of nowhere. So
Hmm.
you're forced to kind of do whatever the passengers tell you to do. And this is really common. This happens all the time. And keep in mind that we drive at any time of the day and at any time of the night. At 2 a.m., 3 a.m., we are out there driving.
So let me shift gears then and go back to the legislation here. So, um, where do you guys know? Can you speak to where it is in the legislative process and give us your take on it? What are things people should know about this piece of legislation?
So the legislation, now that it has the public support of the governor, I think is likely to pass. Um, and since that support came out, a number of amendments were made. Back when this was first made public, um, Rideshare Drivers United took a look at it, and we saw a lot of problems with the bill, where we really wanted to make it stronger. Because the fact is that if you are not a full employee, if you don't have full labor rights, and you try to negotiate a contract, you're starting from absolute zero. You have no legal floor, right, from which to negotiate, in terms of your wages or in terms of any other kinds of protections. And so SEIU, for the last 7 years or so, has been working to kind of build some, union-like structures, I'll call them. They run something through two locals in California, SEIU 721 and 1021, called the California Gig Workers Union. It used to be under the name We Drive Progress and Mobile Workers Alliance. But these kinds of organizing projects have really been staff driven, right? They have been, kind of efforts by SEIU to gain a foothold in driver communities, and have not been really, as Rideshare Drivers United has been, driven by the organizing on the ground from drivers themselves. RDU formed back in 2017, 2018, by drivers at the LAX lot. We were a major force in organizing the large strikes right before Uber's IPO in May 2019, and we were a major force in pushing for AB5 and against Proposition 22. SEIU has been there along the way and done a lot of the work, and sort of filing lawsuits and such, against Proposition 22. But one of our concerns is that they have not really organized deeply within the driver community, and the law as it's written now actually puts SEIU as the de facto union for drivers, because what it says is that they would have had to have negotiated CBAs in the past, collective bargaining agreements in the past, which Rideshare Drivers United has not done, because we are a union of drivers who do not have collective bargaining rights. So, any new kind of organization that is organic to this class of workers, is not, going to qualify. And it says that they also have had to have been organizing drivers for the last 5 years, which they will claim that they've been doing through California Gig Workers Union. Now, Alvaro and I both know that, when we come out to, rallies, or when we go to Sacramento to, pressure legislators, it's our green shirts, it's our green RDU shirts that you see above and beyond, actual drivers from these other groups. And so, we're really concerned that what we're moving towards is an undemocratic model for unionism for rideshare drivers, but I would argue also for the broader, American workforce.
Interesting. And Alvaro, where's kind of membership at when you talk to other drivers on this issue? Is this something that's front and center in the minds of a lot of the other drivers you speak to in terms of this legislation and collective bargaining rights?
So I talk to a lot of drivers, all the time, but drivers usually, because all this labor movement, SEIU, Gavin Newsom, all these negotiations, they're happening behind doors, and then drivers, they're not really familiar with all the process, because when you talk to drivers about SB 1340, about this bill, about Prop 22, drivers voted for Prop 22 without knowing what exactly uh, uh, um, do or didn't do for them. So, like I said, drivers, they're just waiting for whatever happens, and sometimes this is why when it comes to rideshare, this is why it's so hard to organize, because you're dealing with drivers who are always busy. Because somebody who's driving 100 hours a week, do you think that person is going to have time to go for an action or to do something? Go to Sacramento. Miss 1 or 2 days a week. That driver is not going to miss not even 1 day, because he's not going to have enough, to pay their rent or pay their bills. So it's kind of like unique, to organize drivers, because they're always busy and they always tell you, no, I don't have time to go anywhere. So whatever they decide to do for me, that's fine, and this is when the problem comes, that we're always trying, to kind of like educate drivers on this type of topics, because pretty much I've been organizing since I started doing rideshare like 11 years ago. And then with RDU, I've been with Rideshare Drivers United, I would say, for the past 5 or 6 years. I've been organizing with them. I feel that we've been working so hard. Our work has been so hard because we're trying to do it the right way. And on the other hand, SEIU, they took a shortcut. They they say, okay, we're gonna negotiate with Lyft and Uber, and we're gonna become the only rideshare driver union in California. And look, we're the winner. Something that RDU wasn't able to do it. Yeah, the problem is that we were trying to do it the right way, where drivers were gonna have a voice on the table. The way SEIU did it, we're not gonna have a voice on the table.
Fascinating. And maybe for folks out there, I may just ask this a little bit earlier, but maybe Brian, if you want to jump in on this. For folks who don't know what SEIU is, do you want to explain what that is and maybe how they found themselves in a position to seemingly take this win, as Alvaro explains it?
Sure. Service Employees International Union, is SEIU. It's one of the largest unions in the country, 2 million workers. The two locals that have been organizing in the rideshare industry are 721 and 1021. They both represent public sector workers in the LA area, Southern California, and then in the Bay Area as well. And throughout SEIU, I mean, there's different industries that different locals cover. There's healthcare, there's building services, there's public workers. I think one of the things that's been really compelling about my time in working with RDU is that there is such a commitment to having drivers' voices heard as drivers' voices, because it is such a unique job, right? There's no way to understand the ways that the algorithm kind of manages people. There's no way to understand the struggles that people have unless you've done it yourself, right? And for people in sort of high powered spaces, within these very large unions, with a lot of resources at their disposal and a lot of political capital, to assume that they can speak for drivers while really winning away their rights. And I think that this is really the biggest problem, is that Jane McAlevey, who was a scholar and organizer, wrote a great book that called "No Shortcuts," exactly as Alvaro said. That like the way that unions that have grown over the last number of decades have done so is by taking those shortcuts and trying to make arrangements with employers, because the process of organizing has become too difficult, as the NLRB has been defanged, and the National Labor Relations Board, and that there's corporations have taken so much power in clamping down on organizing, that these other approaches have been put in place. But the downside of that has been that unions have really been disempowered and don't have a lot of support from the ground up. This is taking things, I think, one step further, where we're not just saying that workers, employees are going to have kind of like staff-led unions, and like you'll be able to negotiate a contract and have some semblance of benefits and rights and stuff. What we're saying now is we're going back before there were even legal unions under the National Labor Relations Act. The Wagner Act in the 1930s banned company unions. This was a very common practice in the 1920s, where bosses formed organizations for workers to kind of give input, and to have some sense that they had a say in the way that their jobs were shaped, but in fact had no real power. And that was a move to stop the labor movement itself. What Uber and Lyft have done in misclassifying workers is saying, hey, we don't fall under the National Labor Relations Act. We can actually have company unions. And they've pursued that approach in New York City with the Independent Drivers Guild, which is run by the International Association of Machinists. And they've also done it in other countries. There's a union like that in Australia. There's a union like that in the UK. And they found willing partners in sort of the mainstream labor movement, in order to take on that role to kind of build those organizations. So, what we're seeing now in California, um, there are, I think, real concerns that without real driver say, with these kinds of deals being negotiated behind closed doors, that this could be a door opening towards company unionism here in California. The bill does ban company unions, but it defines them very loosely, and it does allow the companies to give financial support to particular activities for the unions, but there's no mechanism to ensure that that money is being spent in any sort of discrete way. So without that oversight, and knowing that there's been years and years of kind of backdoor channeling between Uber, Lyft, and SEIU, a lot of people, I think, have reason to be concerned.
But before we bring Alvaro back in here, I want to ask one follow-up question, because there may be folks listening out there who say, like, what's wrong with the company union? I got a family member who works at Google, and they get a ping pong table and a free seat. These companies are great. What's your critique of company unions? And I know it's a big question, so you can just kind of give some highlights of that if you want.
Well, if you have a company union, how do you ever in that space have people with the right to actually form their own union and have their own organization, right? You know, Companies are only going to allow as much as they're going to allow, and if they're in charge of the process of how workers decide what they want their workplace to look like, and their organization, you're not going to have real democracy in the workplace. And what's particularly scary, I think, at this point, is we're in a really anti-democratic moment. It's not an accident that we had company unions at a time when fascism was on the table in the United States in the 1920s going into the 1930s. And fascism is on the table again now. And so, for if workers don't have the ability to shape their own lives and to criticize their employers and to strike, um, you know, capital has a very, very strong arm and that's really empowering for the bosses. So yeah, I think we really need to, looking at where our politics are right now, we need to, be very, very wary of surrendering those rights.
I also like that ding in the background was like perfect timing. Every time Brian made a good point, there was a ding emphasizing it. We didn't plan that disinfo detoxers, but it worked well. Um, Alvaro, let me ask you. There's probably a lot of drivers out there who are listening to this podcast and may want to know, what they can do to help support what you're trying to do here in terms of collective bargaining. So, what's some advice you'd give to some of those drivers about how they can get involved and help support the larger effort?
To join Rideshare Drivers United, just look for Rideshare Drivers United on Google, and we have like a green shirt. Join us, and because we're the actual drivers, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for an organization that is led by drivers, and we all drivers. So we know the industry. I know how it is to be out there driving 100 hours a week. Gavin Newsom, SEIU, all these people, they don't know how the industry works. So how somebody's gonna dictate how I operate, how I earn money if they don't know the industry. And just to make it clear, what happened with SB 1340, SEIU and Gavin Newsom give a big break to these companies. I was reading an article this morning where Leaf is saying that with this deal, they're gonna save $200 million a year on insurance because they won't have to pay insurance. This is the break the Lyft and the Gavin Newsom and SEIU give them to become the union. So for example, SEIU pretty much say, okay, I want to become the drivers union, but we're gonna cut you a deal. And the deal was that these companies are gonna be saving $200 million a year on insurance that they don't have to pay for drivers.
Okay, and I'll ask this question to both of you. I'll start with Brian, and then we can go to Alvaro if you have anything to add. What about folks out there who are not drivers? They're not, looking necessarily to join Rideshare Drivers United, but they want to help support the cause. What's some things that folks can do to help support what you guys are trying to do here?
Yeah, I think if you live in California, I think that contact your assembly person, contact the governor's office, and let them know that we want real unionism for drivers. That we don't want company unions for drivers or for any workers in this country. If you're a union member and if you're an SEIU member, I would say reach out to your local leadership. This is a bill that um, primarily benefits two locals in California. There are a lot of other locals of SEIU. I am a member of SEIU. I'm a member of the California Faculty Association, which is an SEIU local 1983. It is very important that our union leaders speak out to the larger state level. And I'd say in other parts of the country, this legislation is coming towards you. There's similar legislation in Massachusetts that was actually passed by proposition, which SEIU backed there. There's similar legislation pending in Minnesota, and so and it is Democrats, right, who are pushing on this. Importantly, Tony West is the chief legislative operative for Uber. Tony West is the brother-in-law of Kamala Harris and was a chief policy advisor on her campaign. So when we look at kind of what's happening, this feels like a very right-wing attack on democracy in the workplace, but it is actually coming mostly from kind of the center of the Democratic Party. So as a voter, as a union member, find the places where you have some power. And if you are somebody who uses Uber and Lyft, talk to your driver, right? Talk to your driver, find out what life is like for them. And if you have information about kind of what's happening in their industry, have a conversation with them about it. Ask them what they think about it.
Nice. Alvaro, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell drivers to be more active, on these kind of things. Call your assembly people, call your legislator, call get more involved, and like I said, Google Rideshare Drivers United, look for Rideshare Drivers United, join us. I mean, it costs you anything. You're gonna be part of the drivers, because Lyft and Uber, their goal is to separate drivers. They want us to see each other as competitors, as enemies. But what we're trying to do is kind of like unite, talk to each other to become, the more drivers that we have, the more powerful we're gonna be. And just to add, I don't want to make this political, but just to add a little bit, what Gavin Newsom just did with Lyft and Uber, he negotiated with them and agree to them to whatever rules they put on the table. He agreed to them, and he always criticized whatever our current president is doing. He's doing the exact same thing, and that pisses me off because he criticized what the current president is doing, and he's pretty much doing the exact same thing, giving a break to billionaires.
Well said. Well, thank you both very much. Where can folks go to follow more of your work? You got any websites or other information?
I would just say driversunited.org to follow everything that RDU is doing, and yeah, I'll leave it there.
All right. Thank you both very much. As this story develops, we'll certainly have you back on the program. And I highly encourage the entire audience, check it out. Take the advice of both Brian and Alvaro. Wish you both a ton of luck. Thank you so much for coming on the Disinfo Detox.
Thanks, Nolan.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Detoxers. We'll see you next time.